At 2:13 in the morning, a man pressed a loaded gun against Nolan Voss's temple and told his sister she had 60 seconds to make a decision that would define the rest of her life. Alara hadn't been sleeping. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the stack of unopened bills. She didn't have the stomach to sort through when the door came apart at the hinges. Not a knock, not a warning. Just 3 men in dark coats stepping through splintered wood like they'd done it 100 times before, and they probably had. They didn't say her name. They didn't have to. One of them held up her brother's phone. Screen cracked, blood on the case, and that was the only explanation Alara needed. She went with them now. She stands inside an abandoned warehouse somewhere, south of the river, the concrete floor wet from a leak she can't locate, the air tasting of rust and old motor oil. Nolan is on his knees, 12 feet in front of her, wrists zip-tied behind his back, one eye swollen shut, lip split and still weeping. He won't look at her. That's how she knows it's bad. Nolan Voss has never once in his 32 years of living been too ashamed to meet her eyes until tonight. The man holding the gun against his head is not one of the 3 who came to her apartment. He's younger, maybe 25. He looks bored, which is the most frightening thing about him. And then the lights at the far end of the warehouse shift and someone steps out of the dark. Seen photographs. Everyone in Chicago who lives anywhere the edges of the city's underside has seen photographs. But Roman Belandi in person is something photographs fundamentally fail to prepare you for, not because he's imposing, in the theatrical way crime bosses are supposed to be, not because he has the look of a man who enjoys what he does. It's the opposite. He looks exhausted. He looks like a man who has been running a machine he inherited and never asked for, and the machine has been grinding him down for years, and he has simply decided that exhaustion is the price of staying in control. He's in a dark suit, no tie, collar open. He's 38 years old, and he carries it like 45. He stops 6 feet from Alara, and he doesn't look at Nolan at all. He looks at her. "Miss Voss," he says. His voice is quieter than she expected. "I don't want to be here at 2 in the morning, any more than you do." "Then let my brother go," she says. Her voice comes out steadier than she feels. She's shaking from the sternum down, but her voice holds, and she's grateful for that at least. Roman Belandi tilts his head slightly. Not a dismissal. More like he's genuinely considering whether what she said has merit. "Your brother owes my organization $1,800,000, he says. He borrowed it in installments over 14 months. He used it to cover gambling losses, 2 failed business ventures, and a situation in Las Vegas I won't go into. The repayment deadline was 3 weeks ago. He missed it. He also missed the 2 extensions we offered, and he didn't answer a single call." He pauses. "Does that sound like a man who deserves to be simply let go?" "He's my brother. I'm aware of that." "Then you know I don't have that kind of money." "Also aware." He reaches inside his jacket and produces a folded document. He holds it out toward her, not walking closer, just extending his arm, patient, like a man who does not feel the cold. "This is a contract," he says. 1 year. You marry me in name only under the terms outlined in those pages. In exchange, your brother's debt is wiped. Every dollar. No interest, no penalties, no collection. He lets that settle. Or I let my associate finish what he came here to do, and Nolan Voss becomes a problem no one has to think about anymore. The young man with the gun doesn't move. He's still bored. Nolan finally looks at her. One eye ruined, and one eye desperate. And the look on his face is the one she's seen before when he was 19 and crashed their mother's car and knew he had to tell her, and when he was 24 and lost the money their aunt left them in a card game. He swore he'd won that particular specific look that is not quite shame and not quite apology, but sits somewhere between them, soaked through with the knowledge that he has done it again, that he has dragged her into it again, and that there is no version of this where she doesn't pay for something she didn't cause. Alara takes the contract. She doesn't read it. She knows if she reads it, she'll find something that terrifies her, and she'll hesitate. And hesitation right now is a luxury she does not have. She takes the pen Roman produces from his breast pocket, a plain black pen, nothing theatrical, and she signs her name on the line at the bottom of the last page. Roman takes the document back. He looks at it briefly, then folds it and tucks it away. You'll be moved to the estate tonight, he says. Your apartment will be handled. Handled how? Secured, not touched. You'll have access to whatever you need. He turns and walks back toward the dark end of the warehouse. The young man with the gun steps away from Nolan. Two other men she didn't notice before move in, cut the zip ties, and haul Nolan to his feet. He stumbles. One of them catches him, almost gently, which is somehow the strangest thing that has happened in the last 20 minutes. Wait, Alara says. Roman stops without turning around. When do I see him again? My brother? A pause. Then, when it's safe. Safe from what? He doesn't answer that. He walks into the dark, and the dark takes him, and the lights in that section of the warehouse simply go out, one by one, like something in a building being shut down for the night. Alara stands there alone on wet concrete, holding nothing, the cold draft coming through some broken section of the roof she can't find in the dark. And she thinks, what did I just do? The answer comes back fast and quiet, and completely certain, the only thing you could. The estate sits north of the city, gated and walled, the kind of property that doesn't appear on the real estate listings. Ordinary people browse. Alara arrives in the back of a black SUV. At 4:20 in the morning, the skyline behind her, still half lit, the trees on either side of the private road, heavy and close. She hasn't slept. She doesn't think she will. The house is large without being grotesque about it. Stone exterior, old growth trees along the drive, a fountain turned off for the season standing at the center of the circular approach. She counts 4 visible security personnel as the car pulls in. She suspects there are more she isn't meant to count. A woman meets her at the door. Mid-50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back, the bearing of someone who has managed complicated households for complicated people for a very long time. She introduces herself as Mrs. Harlan and does not offer a first name, which Alara notes. Your room is ready, Mrs. Harlan says, and doesn't ask if she had a good trip, because it is 4 in the morning and any fool can see she didn't. The bedroom is larger than Alara's entire apartment. Clean, simply furnished. A window that takes up most of one wall, with a view of the backgrounds, lit now by landscape lighting that throws long shadows across manicured grass. Bathroom with actual hot water, which she discovers when she turns the tap and stands over the sink looking at herself in the mirror for a long time. She looks like a woman who signed her life away at gunpoint, which is, she supposes, accurate enough. There's a knock at the bedroom door at 7:15. She hasn't slept, has been sitting in the chair by the window, watching the grounds lighten as the sun comes up over the tree line, cataloging exit routes. Counting the rotation of the guard, she can see from the window 2 of them, regular intervals, predictable, files all of it away. She opens the door. It's Mrs. Harlan with coffee and a small tray of food she didn't ask for. She takes it because she realizes she hasn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, and her hands are starting to feel disconnected from her arms. Mr. Belandi asks that you join him for breakfast at 8, if you're comfortable, Mrs. Harlan says, and if I'm not comfortable, then the tray will suffice. Alara considers this. Tell him I'll be there. She eats standing at the window watching the grounds. The guard rotation shifts at 7:30. New faces. She starts her count over. Roman Belandi is already at the table when she comes down, reading something on his phone, a cup of coffee in front of him that looks like it's been there long enough to go lukewarm. He sets the phone face down when she enters and gestures to the chair across from him. The breakfast room is not the formal dining room she expected. Smaller, a corner of the house where morning light actually gets in, a round table that seats 4, newspaper folded beside the coffee service. It looks like the room of a man who eats breakfast alone most mornings, and has simply stopped noticing that since insignate, he sits. He pours her coffee before she can reach for the carafe, which she finds oddly disconcerting, not because it's aggressive, but because it isn't. It's just a person filling another person's cup. How did you sleep? He asks. I didn't. He nods, like this was the expected answer. That's normal. First few nights in an unfamiliar place. He picks up his cup. Passes. Has this happened before? Women living here against their will? He looks at her over the rim of his cup. Not offended. Assessing. You're not here against your will. The contract gives you the right to leave at any time. She puts her cup down. The doors are guarded. The perimeter is secured. That's different. Is it? He doesn't answer immediately. He sets his cup down and looks at her, and for a moment she sees something shift in his expression. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that suggests he is aware of the precise dimension of the line he is walking. You're safer here than you are anywhere else right now, he says. That's the honest version. Safer from what? You said that last night too. I said when it's safe. Different thing. You're splitting hairs. I'm being careful with language because being careless with it gets people hurt. He picks up the note and sets it back down without opening it. Your brother didn't just accumulate debt. He accumulated enemies, people who want what life he has. And because you're his family, those people have decided that you're a useful point of pressure. Alara feels the cold slide through her that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. What does my brother have? Roman looks at her for a long moment. Then, that's a longer conversation. I'm not going anywhere, apparently. Something flickers at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The memory of one, maybe. No, you're not. He reaches across the table and turns over a folder she hadn't noticed was sitting there. Inside, the contract she signed, a full copy, and beneath it, a document she doesn't recognize immediately, a prenuptial agreement, already signed by him, with a clause at the bottom she has to read twice. In the event that this marriage is dissolved for any reason, all financial obligations previously associated with Nolan Voss are permanently extinguished and cannot be reinstated by any party. She looks up from the paper. It's binding, he says. Your brother's debt is gone, regardless of what happens between us. I want you to understand that's not leverage. It's done. She doesn't know what to do with that. She's been steeling herself for the reveal of the catch the hidden clause, the thing that makes the contract worse than it appeared at 2 a.m. with a gun against her brother's head. But there's no catch. Just a man sitting across a breakfast table, lukewarm coffee, morning light, and a signed agreement that gives her brother his life back at no additional cost. She doesn't trust it. She doesn't trust him. But she takes the document and folds it carefully and puts it in the pocket of the borrowed sweater, Mrs. Harlan left outside her door this morning. I want to talk to Nolan, she says. Not yet. That's not a negotiation, Mr. Belandi. I want to speak to my brother, and I want to keep him alive long enough for that conversation to mean something. He holds her gaze. Give me 48 hours. Then you can talk to him as much as you want. She wants to push. She can feel the push rising in her chest, the reflex of a woman who has spent 29 years being the responsible one, the one who holds things together, the one who fixes the damage her brother leaves in his wake. But something in Roman Belandi's face stops her, not because he looks threatening, but because he looks genuinely worried. Not about her, about Nolan, and that doesn't fit the architecture of the man she expected. Fine, she says. 48 hours. She picks up her coffee, still hot. The wedding happens 36 hours later, not 48. Someone gets a call at 11 on the second morning that changes the timeline. Alara doesn't hear the call. She hears the aftermath, Mrs. Harlan moving through the house with a quiet but accelerated purpose. 2 staff members she hasn't seen before, appearing briefly in the hallway outside her room, and then Roman himself knocking on her door at noon to tell her they're moving the ceremony to that afternoon. What happened? She asks. A precaution, he says. That's not an answer. No, he agrees, it isn't, but it's what I have right now. The ceremony is small. A judge she's never met. 2 witnesses she assumes are Belandi associates, and Mrs. Harlan standing near the back of the room with the particular expression of a woman who had seen everything and decided long ago to feel nothing about any of it. The room is a formal parlor on the ground floor, high ceilings, old furniture, afternoon light cutting in at a steep angle that makes everything look more dramatic than it probably needs to be. Alara wears the clothes she arrived in. Nobody suggested otherwise. Roman is in a dark suit, no tie again, and she wonders if he simply doesn't own ties, or if it's a deliberate choice, some boundary between who he is at 3 a.m. in a warehouse and who he's supposed to be in the world. The judge reads the necessary words. Roman says the required things in a flat, clear voice, like a man signing a business document. Alara says them too, and her voice holds again, which she's starting to think is less composure and more simple shock. Some part of her nervous system has decided that the situation is too far outside normal operating parameters and has simply stopped sending the panic signals. There is no ring ceremony in the traditional sense. Roman produces a plain silver band from his jacket pocket and holds it out to her, palm flat, like an offering. She takes it and puts it on herself. He nods slightly, which is somehow more respectful than anything theatrical would have been. Afterward, the judge leaves, the witnesses leave, and it's just her and Roman in the parlor. Afternoon light fading, the house quiet around them. That's it, she says, that's it. She looks at the ring on her hand. Fits. She wonders how he knew her size and then decides she doesn't want to know. There are details in Roman Belandi's operation that she is not yet ready to examine closely. 1 year, she says. 1 year, he confirms. She looks up at him. I'm going to figure out what you're not telling me. He meets her eyes without flinching. I know, he says simply. And something about the way he says zit, not a threat, not a dismissal, just a statement of acknowledged fact, tells her that this man is not afraid of being understood. He just doesn't think understanding him is going to go the way she expects. The days that follow have a texture she doesn't have language for. She is not a prisoner, the word keeps snagging on something. Because prisoners don't have full run of a house, access to a library, warm meals, a staff that treats them with distant but genuine courtesy. She is not a guest guests can leave. She is not a wife, not in any sense she recognizes. She is something the English language apparently hasn't gotten around to naming yet. A woman who signed a contract at gunpoint and is now trying to understand what she signed. She starts with the contract itself. She reads it in full on the third day, sitting in the library while rain comes in sideways against the windows. Every page. It's thorough and it's strange. She has access to financial support if she needs it. No obligation to appear publicly or socially as his wife, unless she specifically agrees in advance. No physical requirements of any kind. That clause is there in plain language, blunt and complete, which she hadn't expected. The 1-year term is fixed. Early dissolution by mutual agreement is permitted. Dissolution by either party alone requires a 30-day notice period. There is nothing in it about love. There is nothing in it about pretending. On the 4th day, she starts looking for the hidden exits. She finds 3 that aren't guarded. Around the clock, a service entrance on the east side of the property. A gate at the back of the grounds that's only watched from 7 in the evening to 6 in the morning, and a section of the north wall where the climbing ivy has been allowed to grow thick enough that it would support a person's weight. She documents all 3 and does nothing with the information, because leaving is not the point. Understanding is the point, and she can't understand anything from outside these walls. On the 6th day, Roman Belandi finds her in the library at 10:30 at night. She's been going through the bookshelves, not randomly, systematically, the way she goes through everything, because she is a woman who spent 4 years working in estate management before her current job in archival research. And the bookshelves of a powerful man are never just books. They are an argument. They are a self-presentation. They tell you who he wants to be seen as. And sometimes, if you look at the gaps in the wear patterns and the books shoved sideways to fill space where something's been removed, they tell you who he actually is. She's found 3 gaps. 2 books removed from the lower shelves. The gaps are dustless, recent. 1 from the upper shelf, toward the back, where it's hard to reach without a step stool. She's in the process of mentally cataloging this when Roman comes in. He stops when he sees her, then crosses to the side table where a decanter sits and pours 2 glasses without asking. He puts one on the table beside her chair. She looks at it, then at him. I'm not a drinker, she says. Then don't drink it. He sits in the chair across from her, his own glass on his knee. What are you looking for? I'm looking for books to read. You have a system. She pauses. I work in archival research. I'm used to organizing collections. At 10:30 on a Thursday night. Couldn't sleep. She sets the book in her hand on the table. What happened to the books you removed? He looks at her for a beat. Then, some things aren't ready to be explained yet. That's the 2nd time you've said something like that to me. Probably keep happening. She leans forward slightly. Let me tell you something about me, Mr. Belandi. I don't handle not yet well. I never have. When someone tells me there are things I'm not allowed to know, I don't accept it. I find out. I always find out. She meets his gaze. So either you tell me what's going on, or I find out on my own. And there's a reasonable chance I find out something worse than what you'd have told me if you'd just told me. He looks at her for a long moment. The lamp on the table between them throws sharp light and shadow across his face, and for a second she sees it the real version, the one under the controlled stillness, the one that is tired and complicated, and carrying something heavy. Your father, he says. She goes very still. He was not a simple man, Roman says, and his connection to my family was not simple. I've been trying to decide how to tell you this in a way that he stops, starts again. There's a photograph. I want you to see it before I explain it, because the explanation without the photograph sounds like something I'm making up, and the photograph without the explanation is worse. Show me the photograph. Tomorrow now. He looks at her. Then he stands, sets his glass on the table, and walks out of the library. She thinks she's pushed too hard, that he's done with the conversation, and is already calculating her next move when he comes back. He's holding a photograph, a physical one, old enough that the edges have started to curl. He puts it on the table in front of her. Two men, standing outside a building she doesn't recognize. Some kind of industrial structure, the photograph taken from a distance and slightly out of focus, like someone was using a long lens. The older man on the left is dressed in work clothes, heavy jacket, hands in his pockets. The man on the right is younger, sharper dressed, clearly not from the same world. She knows the man on the left immediately, the same way you know someone's face when it has been part of your memory since childhood, when it is one of the first faces you ever learned to recognize as safe. Her father, Martin Voss, dead 11 years. She picks up the photograph, looks at the man on the right, then back at Roman. Father, she says. Yes. When was this taken? 1997. You were 2 years old. She sets the photograph down carefully, like it might break. Tell me what this means. Roman sits back down. He puts his elbows on his knees, and he looks at her with the expression of a man who knows that what he's about to say is going to change the shape of something, and who has decided that the change is unavoidable. Your father saved my father's life, he says. In 1997, there was an attempt on my father's life, a coordinated one, from inside the organization, a faction that wanted to move against the Belandi family. Your father was a laborer, working on a building renovation we owned. He overheard something he wasn't supposed to hear, and instead of doing what any rational man would do, which is pretend he heard nothing, he warned my father directly. Roman is quiet for a moment. My father owed him a debt for that, a real one. Not the kind the Belandi family usually deals in. Personal one. Alara doesn't say anything. She's listening with the particular quality of attention she reserves for moments when she can feel the ground shifting under her, and she needs to understand exactly how much and in which direction. They stayed in contact for years afterward. Roman continues. Not close, not friends, not that kind of thing, but a connection. My father sent money to your family twice when things were hard, anonymously. Your father refused to take payment directly. He was that kind of man. He glances at the photograph. He also, over the years, became aware that certain things were happening inside my father's organization. Things that were wrong. He kept records. The cold that moves through her now is different from the one before. This one has edges. What kind of record, she says. Kind, Roman says carefully, that could bring down several powerful people who would very much prefer not to be brought down. She looks at him, at the photograph, at the ring on her finger that she put on herself 5 days ago in an afternoon-lit parlor in front of a judge she'll never see again. Where are these records now? She asks. Roman holds her gaze. That, he says, is what I've spent the last 3 years trying to find out. She picks up the untouched glass of whiskey and takes a small sip, just enough to give herself a second she needs. And when she sets it back down, she looks at Roman Belandi with the clear and steady gaze of a woman who has just realized that what she thought she signed and what she actually signed are two completely different things. The house is quiet around them. Outside, the guard rotation changes. Neither of them moves. The night settles in, cold and full of things that have not yet been said, and Alara Voss' wife, by contract, daughter of a man whose secrets are still alive, somewhere in the dark, decides that 48 hours of patience are up, and the search for answers begins tonight. She didn't sleep that night either. She sat in the library chair until nearly 2 in the morning. The photograph of her father and Roman's father face down on the table because she couldn't look at it anymore and couldn't put it away. And she turned over everything Roman had told her, with the methodical exhaustion of a woman who processes by thinking rather than feeling. She'd always been like that. Nolan used to say she wasn't cold, she was just built with the thermostat in her head instead of her chest. He meant it as a criticism, usually. Right now, it was the only thing keeping her functional. Records. Her father had kept records. Martin Voss, who died of a heart attack on a Tuesday in March 11 years ago, who left behind a 12-year-old Toyota, a life insurance policy worth $40,000, and 2 children who didn't fully understand until he was gone. How much of the world's chaos he'd been quietly absorbing on their behalf. That man had apparently also been keeping a documented record of criminal activity inside one of Chicago's most powerful crime families. She thought she knew him. She thought she knew everything about him. The photograph stayed face down. At 2:15, she went upstairs, not to sleep, but to think in a different room, because sometimes a change of walls is enough to change the angle of a thought. She stood at the window in her room and watched the grounds, and thought about what Roman had not said. He'd told her what the records were. He hadn't told her what was in them. He'd told her father kept them. He hadn't told her how he knew. He'd said he'd spent 3 years looking for them. He hadn't said why 3 years what happened 3 years ago that made this urgent. There were too many scenes in Nora's story. She could feel them without being able to see them yet. The next morning she came down early, before 8, and found Roman already in the small breakfast room. He was on the phone, speaking in a low voice, and when she appeared in the doorway he ended the call, immediately, not guiltily, not with the specific energy of someone caught in something, but with the particular authority of a man who simply decides when conversations begin and end. She sat down, poured her own coffee this time. "I have questions," she said. "I assumed you would. How do you know my father kept records?" Specifically, picked up his cup. "My father told me, before he died." "When did your father die?" 4 years ago, and the 3 years you've been looking you started 1 year after his death." He looked at her with a slight adjustment in his expression, the kind that happens when someone recalibrates how much attention you're paying. "That's correct." "Why the gap?" "Because," he said slowly, "I spent the first year after his death trying to understand what I'd inherited. And it took me that long to understand that the records were part of it." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "What do the records contain?" "Specifically, evidence of a double cross. Inside our organization, going back years. Someone feeding information to a rival syndicate." He paused. "Not just operational information. Personal information. Kind that gets people killed. And you think my brother has the ledger." "I think your brother knows where it is. Those are different things." She looked at him. "You said last night my father was murdered." A beat. The room was quiet. Outside, a bird hit one of the windows, not hard, just a brush of wings against glass, and they both turned toward the sound by reflex, then turned back. "He didn't die of a heart attack," Roman said. She'd been expecting it. She'd been expecting it since the photograph. But hearing it said plainly, in a quiet room over morning coffee, was its own separate event, and it hit her in the sternum with a force that had nothing to do with surprise, and everything to do with grief. Reshaped grief, she thought she'd finished with. Grief that apparently had a second room she hadn't found yet. "Who?" she said. "That's what the ledger would tell us." "You don't know?" "I have a suspicion. I've had it for 2 years. I won't say it out loud until I can prove it." He met her eyes. "Because if I'm wrong, I destroy the wrong person's life. And if I'm right and I can't prove it, I give the right person a reason to come for everyone I'm responsible for." That was the most she'd heard him say at one time. She noticed he chose the word responsible rather than care about, and she filed that away alongside everything else. "I want to talk to Nolan," she said. "Today, not tomorrow." Today, he looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. "This afternoon. I'll arrange it." She stood up, leaving half her coffee. "And Roman." She waited until he looked up. "The next time you decide what I'm ready to know, and when I'm ready to know it, don't. Tell me all of it. I'm not someone who falls apart." He didn't argue. He didn't agree either. He just watched her walk out of the room with the particular expression of a man who has decided that the situation is more complicated than he originally calculated, and is not entirely sure yet whether that's a problem. Call with Nolan happened at 3 in the afternoon. Video, 6 minutes long, which was all Roman would allow. She took it in her room with the door closed. Nolan appeared on screen, looking better than the warehouse the swelling had gone down. The split lip was healing, but worse, in the way that mattered more. He looked scared in the deep, quiet way of someone who has had time to sit alone with what they've done and is finally understanding the actual scale of it. "Are you okay?" he said immediately. "I'm fine. Are you safe?" Yeah, they're treating me okay. "Else, I'm sorry. Don't." She kept her voice level. "Don't apologize right now, Nolan. Just answer me. The ledger. Dad's ledger. Do you have it?" His face changed. Just slightly. A compression around the eyes. A fractional tightening of his jaw. She'd spent 29 years reading this face, and she saw it immediately. He knew exactly what she was talking about. "Where did you hear about that?" "Roman told me." "Where is it?" "I don't. It's complicated." "Where is it?" He looked away from the camera. Looked back. "I don't have it. That's not what I asked." "I know where it is," he said lower. "I've known for 2 years. Dad left me instructions. It was supposed to be a safeguard, something to use if things ever got bad enough." He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, the gesture she recognized from their entire childhood. Nolan buying himself 3 seconds to decide how much truth he can afford. "I didn't know things would get this bad, Nolan." "Who killed Dad?" The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, she watched something cross her brother's face that she had never seen there before. It wasn't fear. It was the specific expression of a man who knows something so heavy that carrying it has been gradually collapsing him from the inside, and someone has just asked him to set it down in front of them, and he can't decide if putting it down means relief or catastrophe. "Nolan, I can't tell you on a monitored line," he said. "Then tell Roman." "Roman," he stopped, looked directly into the camera. "Listen to me very carefully. Roman is trying to help you. I believe that. But there are people around him that he doesn't know about yet. Careful who you trust in that house." The call cut at 6 minutes exactly. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, then set it on the bed and walked to the window. "Be careful who you trust in that house." She turned that sentence over for a long time. She met Victor Sloan for the first time that evening, which felt, in retrospect, like a piece of timing that was either coincidental or wasn't. He came to the estate for a dinner meeting she gathered from Mrs. Harlan that these happened regularly, that Sloan functioned as Roman's operational lieutenant, the man who managed the day-to-day movement of the organization so that Roman could focus on the larger architecture of whatever the Belandi family had become in the 4 years since his father's death. She wasn't invited to the dinner. She hadn't expected to be. But the house had a layout she'd been learning since her first night, and the dining room, where the men ate, shared a wall with a sitting room that was never used. After 6 in the evening, and the wall between them was, by the standards of old construction, remarkably thin. She didn't plan it, or she planned it. The way she planned most things, without admitting to herself that she was planning, just noting that the sitting room was quiet, and the voices from the dining room were audible if you sat in the right chair by the interior wall and didn't move. She sat in the right chair. Victor Sloan's voice was smooth, not in a rehearsed way, in the way of a man who has simply spent a long time learning how to talk so that people find him easy to agree with. He had the kind of cadence that made you track it, that made you nod along half a beat before you'd actually registered what was being said. Most of what she heard was operational logistics, a property matter, something involving a contact in Detroit she didn't have context for. But at one point, the conversation shifted, and she pressed closer to the wall, because something in Sloane's tone changed, the smoothness dropping a register. "The woman," Sloane said, "the wife." A pause. "Then Roman, what about her?" "I'm just asking how you're managing it. She's not a passive person. I ran background on her before the arrangement was confirmed. Sharp. I know. Sharp people ask questions." "She's asking them," Roman said. "I'm answering them." "How much are you telling her?" Another pause. Longer. "What I think she needs to know." "That's not an answer, Roman. It's the only one you're getting tonight. She heard the specific quality of silence that comes after one person has drawn a line and another person has decided whether to push it. Sloane apparently decided not to. "There's been movement," Sloane said, and his voice was fully professional again. "On the east side. Our contact says the Moretti people are repositioning. It might be nothing. It's not nothing. You're sure? Timing is wrong for it to be nothing. When I said 48 hours ago that we needed to accelerate the security protocols, this is why." Sloane was quiet for a moment. "The woman's brother. The ledger. Don't. Roman, if the Morettis know the ledger exists." I said don't. The words weren't loud. They were the opposite of loud. They were the kind of words that stop a room entirely, that carry authority, not through volume, but through the absolute certainty underneath them. She sat back in the chair, her heart going faster than she wanted it to. She had a name now, Moretti, and she had something else, the knowledge that Sloane had run background on her before, the marriage, which meant he'd been involved in the arrangement from the beginning, which meant he was not simply Roman's operational assistant, he was embedded in the decision-making, had been from the start. She thought about what Nolan said. "Be careful who you trust in that house." She looked at the wall between herself and the dining room, at the ring on her finger in the low light of the sitting room. She stayed in that chair for another 40 minutes, until she heard the dinner end and the sound of Sloane's departure car in the drive, gates, the particular acoustic signature of a large vehicle leaving a large property. Then she waited another 10 minutes and went back to the library. Roman found her there an hour later. She was reading, or performing the outward behavior of reading, and when he came in, she looked up. "Victor Sloane has been with you how long?" she said. He stopped in the doorway. 11 years. "You trust him completely." It wasn't quite a question. He answered it like one anyway, within certain limits. "Why?" "I'm just understanding the structure of things here." Came in and sat down, not across from her this time, but at an angle, the lamp throwing his shadow long and angular across the wall. He looked at her with the particular attention of a man who is trying to determine what she knows and how she knows it, and has too much respect for her intelligence to ask directly. "What did you hear?" he said. She looked at him. "The sitting room wall is thin." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What did you hear?" "The Morettis are repositioning. You think it's related to the ledger." She set her book on the table. "And Sloane ran background on me before you arranged the marriage." Something shifted in Roman's face. Not anger, something more interior than that, something recalculated. He runs background on everyone. It's procedure. "You knew about the Morettis before tonight." "Yes." "When were you going to tell me?" "When I had something concrete enough to tell you." "That's not." Took a breath. Chose the precise words. "Roman, if the people coming for Nolan's ledger are the same people who had my father killed, then this isn't your story to manage on my behalf. It's mine. It became mine 11 years ago when my father died on a Tuesday in March, and nobody told us the truth." The room was very quiet. He looked at her for a long time. She held the look, not defiantly, but steadily, the way you hold a position when you know you're right, and you're prepared to wait as long as it takes for the other person to arrive at the same conclusion. "I know," he said finally, and this time when he said it, it didn't sound like a concession. It sounded like the beginning of something. 3 days passed. In those 3 days, 2 more video calls with Nolan, each lasting less than 5 minutes, each ending with her more unsettled than before. Her brother was holding something back. She could feel it, like a change, in barometric pressure, the way you feel weather coming before you can see it. Kept asking her if she was okay. He kept asking, specifically, if anyone had been in her room when she wasn't there. She checked after the second call. The books on the small shelf near the window were in the wrong order. She'd arranged them alphabetically by author on her second day in the house. Someone had replaced one of them. The spine was facing inward, which no one does accidentally. Pulled it. Nothing inside. But the book was wrong. It wasn't one she'd selected. It was a copy of a novel she'd never read. The kind of mass-market paperback that doesn't belong in a library like this. And on the title page in pencil, so light she nearly missed it, a sequence of numbers. She copied them into her phone. She didn't know what they were yet. She would figure it out. On the 4th morning, she came down to find Roman at the front of the house, standing in the entry, speaking to 2 men she didn't recognize, not staff, not the regular security rotation. Something different, the body language of men reporting, rather than receiving instruction. He ended the conversation immediately when he saw her. "What happened?" she said. He looked at her. His jaw was set in a way she hadn't seen before, a new configuration. The one that meant the thing that happened was bad enough, that the usual managed calm was costing him more effort than normal. "The safe house where Nolan was staying," he said. "Someone found it." Her stomach dropped. He's not there. He wasn't there when they arrived. He said it quickly, cleanly, to get it in front of her fast. "He's alive. He's moving. We don't know where yet. Someone inside your organization told them where he was." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She stood in the entry of his house, the morning cold coming in under the front door, the ring on her finger, heavy and strange, and she looked at Roman Belandi and thought about the numbers, penciled, on the title page of a book that had been placed on her shelf by someone who knew she would find it. "The numbers," she said. "Someone left me a set of numbers, in a book in my room." He went very still. "What numbers?" She read them out from her phone. She watched his face as she did, and what she saw there was not confusion. He recognized them. Whatever these numbers identified, he knew. "Those are coordinates," he said. "To what?" He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him make a decision. She could see it. The specific moment when a man who has been holding information at a careful distance decides that the cost of holding it is now higher than the cost of releasing it. "To a property," he said, "in a warehouse district on the south side. My father used it for storage. It's been empty for 15 years, officially." He stopped. "It's where your father met with my father in 9997. She looked down at her phone, then back at him. "Someone in this house left you those coordinates," he said. "Quiet, precise. Someone who wants you to go there. Or someone who wants both of us to go there," she said. The silence between them had a different quality. Now not the silence of two people figuring each other out, but the silence of two people who have simultaneously realized they are standing in the middle of something larger than the story they thought they were in, and that there are other people involved who have been ahead of them this whole time, moving pieces they couldn't see. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Text message. 4 words. Nolan found the ledger. Then 3 seconds later, a second message. Victor knows. She showed the screen to Roman. She watched the color drain from his face in the particular way of a man who has just had a suspicion he's been refusing to act on fully confirmed. And she understood in that moment that Roman Belandi had suspected Victor Sloan for a long time and had been holding that suspicion at bay, because acting on it means dismantling the closest thing he has to a trusted structure, and without it, the organization his father built and his father died protecting becomes vulnerable to every enemy it has ever made. "We need to move," he said. "Where Nolan? We need to find him before Victor does." She was already moving toward the stairs, already calculating what she needed, how fast she could be ready. The coordinates in her phone, the book on her shelf, the numbers in pencil so light. She almost missed them, evidence of someone inside this house who was playing a longer game than any of them. Behind her, she heard Roman on the phone, voice low and urgent, a smooth, controlled register gone, something rawer underneath. She was at the top of the stairs when her phone buzzed a third time. Same unknown number. One message. "Don't bring Sloan." Stopped on the landing. Read it twice. Put the phone in her pocket. She went to her room, grabbed her jacket, and came back to the top of the stairs, and she stood there for a moment, looking down at the entry, at Roman still on the phone, at the front door and the morning light coming through the sidelights, and at Victor Sloan, who had just let himself in through the front door, with the ease of a man who has a key, who has always had a key, who belongs here in a way that now, in the gray light of this particular morning, makes her throat close. Sloan looked up and saw her. He smiled. It was a good smile. She wondered how many times she had seen it and not understood what was behind it. Smiled back. And understood, in that precise moment, that whatever came next, Nolan, the ledger, the coordinates, the truth about her father's death, none of it could happen with Victor Sloan in the room. Came down the stairs with her jacket on, and her face arranged into something that looked like a normal morning, which was the hardest performance of her life. because Victor Sloan was standing in the entry hall, 12 feet below her, and he was watching her descend with that easy, calibrated smile, and every nerve in her body was screaming at a frequency she couldn't let reach her face. "Mrs. Belandi," he said. He used the name with a specific weight, not disrespectful, not warm, just precise, the way you'd label a file. "Mr. Sloan." She reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped at a natural distance. Early morning. Always is. In this business. He glanced toward the back of the house where Roman had moved with his phone call. "Is he available?" He was just finishing something. She gestured vaguely toward the breakfast room. "Coffee's on." He nodded and moved past her. She tracked him in her peripheral vision until he was through the doorway. Then she turned and walked in the opposite direction, around the hall, to the back corridor where Roman was standing near the window with his phone already lowered. She put herself close to him, closest enough that her voice was barely audible. The third message. "Don't bring Sloan." Roman's eyes went to the doorway she'd come from. Something moved through his face, not surprise, not quite, but the specific expression of a man who has been refusing to open a door for a long time and has just had someone else push it open from the other side. "He's in the breakfast room," she said. "I know." He was already thinking. She could see it, the rapid, contained quality of his attention when he was running calculations. "I need 20 minutes. To do what?" "To figure out who sent you those messages before I do anything that can't be undone." He looked at her directly. "Don't tell him about Nolan." "I wasn't planning to." "Don't tell him about the coordinates either, Roman." She held his gaze. "I'm not the one you need to worry about in this house." He looked at her for one long beat, and something passed between them that wasn't trust exactly. Trust was too clean a word for what this was, but was the functional equivalent of it. The mutual recognition that they are, at this particular moment, the only two people in the building whose interests are fully aligned. He went toward the breakfast room. She went upstairs and sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her phone and thought about the book with the penciled coordinates and the unknown number that had known about Victor before Roman had confirmed it. And she thought, someone inside this house has been trying to help her. Someone who couldn't say it out loud. She opened her phone and typed a reply to the unknown number. 2 words, "Who are you?" The response came in under a minute. "Someone who was there when your father died." Her hand went still on the phone. She typed, "Who killed him?" 3 minutes passed. 4. She sat absolutely motionless on the edge of the bed, the phone in both hands, not breathing in any way she was consciously aware of. Then, go to the coordinates. Bring Roman. Leave before Sloan notices you're gone. The ledger is there. So is the answer. She stood up. Her legs were steadier than they had any right to be. Getting out of the house without Sloan noticing required 2 things, Roman's cooperation and a reason. Roman provided both. He told Sloan there was a security matter on the east perimeter that needed his direct attention. One of the monitoring systems had flagged an anomaly overnight, and given the current situation with the Moretis, it needed to be walked in person. Sloan accepted this without visible suspicion, because it was the kind of task that was his to handle, and because Roman delivered it with the flat, procedural calm of a man who doesn't know his lieutenant is compromised. Alara watched Sloan leave through the front window. She watched him cross the drive toward the east side of the property with 2 security personnel flanking him, unhurried, professional, already on his phone. She watched until he was out of sight around the corner of the building. "How long do we have?" she said. 30 minutes before he realizes there's nothing wrong with the east perimeter. Roman was already moving, maybe less. They went out through the service entrance, the one she'd cataloged on her 4th day, the one with the irregular guard rotation. Roman's driver, a man named Ket, who had the compressed, watchful quality of someone trained to notice everything and react to none of it, had the car already running in the service lane. She didn't ask how Roman had arranged that in the 12 minutes since she'd come down the stairs. She was starting to understand that Roman Belandi's competence operated in layers she hadn't finished counting yet. The drive south took 22 minutes. She showed Ket the coordinates on her phone, and he drove without comment, without GPS, which meant he knew the area. That was a piece of information she held onto. The warehouse district came up, gray and flat against the morning sky, wide streets, industrial buildings. the particular silence of spaces that once held a lot of noise and now hold none. Ket stopped the car a block from the coordinates, and Roman told him to stay with the vehicle and call nobody. Ket said nothing. He stayed. They walked the block on foot. The building was 3 stories, brick, the kind that has been repurposed and abandoned and repurposed again, and finally abandoned permanently. A loading dock on the ground level, the steel door dented and old, a newer padlock on the hasp that was inconsistent with everything around it. Roman looked at the padlock, looked at her. Someone's been maintaining this. Someone's been expecting us, she said. He reached into his jacket and she tensed, but what he produced was a key, not a weapon, a flat, old-fashioned key on a plain ring that he looked at for a moment before fitting it to the padlock. It opened. She looked at him. Your father's key. I've had it for 4 years. He pushed the door. I never knew what it went to. Inside, concrete, cold, the smell of age and closed air, and something chemical underneath that might be old machinery or might be older memory. The kind of smell that attaches itself to significant places and doesn't leave. High sea ceilings. Light coming through a row of transom windows along one wall, gray and diffuse enough to see by. Space was mostly empty, old shelving units along the walls, a section near the back that had been used for vehicle storage. At some point, the oil stains still dark on the floor, and in the center of the space, sitting on a folding chair with his forearms on his knees and his face looking like it had been through another 3 days of very bad decisions, was Nolan Voss. Alara crossed the distance between them in about 4 steps and grabbed her brother by both arms and just held on for a moment, not saying anything. Because some reunions don't start with words. They start with the physical confirmation that the person is still real, still solid, still breathing. She could feel him shaking faintly under her hands. I'm okay, he said into her shoulder. You're not okay, she said back. But you're here. She stepped back and looked at him. He had a cut on his forehead that had been roughly cleaned. His jacket was gone. He was wearing someone else's flannel shirt, too big in the shoulders. He looked at Roman over her shoulder with an expression that was complicated, not hostile, not trusting, somewhere in the uneasy space between them. How'd you find me? Nolan said. You sent the messages, Alara said. Coordinates, the texts. Nolan frowned, shook his head. What messages? She went still. Someone texted me from an unknown number. Told me you found the ledger. Told me about Sloan. Sent me these coordinates. Nolan looked at her with complete, unperformed confusion. L. That wasn't me. I've had the same burner phone for 3 days and I've called you twice. That's it. The cold that went through her then was the particular cold of understanding that you have been led somewhere deliberately by someone whose identity you still don't know. And that, led is a gentler word than herded. Roman was already scanning the space. His hand was at his jacket now. Different posture, the posture of a man who has just reclassified the situation. We're not alone in this building, he said. Low, flat. No, said a voice from the back of the space. You're not. She came out of the shadows near the vehicle storage section, a woman, 60 or so, compact, with gray hair cut short and the bearing of someone who was once military and never stopped being it. She was wearing a dark jacket, hands visible, nothing in them. She walked toward them at a measured pace and stopped at a distance that was neither confrontational nor comfortable. Alara didn't know her. Roman's face said he didn't either. But Nolan made a small sound, barely audible, and looked at this woman with the specific expression of someone who has been both dreading and needing this encounter for a very long time. Nolan, the woman said. You should have called me sooner. I know, he said quietly. Who is this? Alara said. Her name is Carla Dent, Nolan said. She worked with Dad. Alara looked at Carla Dent. Worked with him how? I was a federal investigator for 22 years, Carla said. Organized crime. When your father found out what was being documented in that ledger, he came to me. He didn't trust the official channels too many people on the wrong side of too many things. So he came to me directly, informally, and we spent 2 years building a case together. She paused. He was killed 8 days before we were going to move on it. Space was very quiet. Somewhere in the building's upper level, something shifted the building settling, or wind against old windows, or something else. The ledger, Roman said. Where is it? Carla looked at him with an assessment that was not unfriendly but was thorough. Before I answer, that are you certain you weren't followed? I'm certain we left without Sloane knowing, Roman said. That's the best I can give you. Something crossed Carla's face. Then we need to move faster than I planned. She turned to a shelving unit against the east wall and reached behind the back panel a practice reach. Someone who has done this before and produced a flat metal case, the kind used for documents or photographs, about the size of a hardcover book, sealed with a combination lock. She put it on the shelf in front of them. She looked at Alara. Your father's combination, she said. He told me only you would know it. Not Nolan you. Alara stared at the lock. She thought about her father, about Martin Voss, and his methodical, quiet way of doing things, his habit of leaving small codes for her, inside birthday cards numbers, that meant something only to the two of them. Dates and times and combinations built from memories he was certain she'd kept. Stepped forward and turned the dials. Her hands were steady. The combination came to her without effort, the way things do when they've been stored in muscle memory rather than conscious recall. Her mother's birthday, the address of the first house they'd lived in, the year her parents married. 3 sequences. The lock released. Inside, a ledger, physical, handwritten, the pages dense with her father's careful, small script. Beneath it, a sealed envelope and a USB drive. She lifted the ledger. It was heavier than she expected, which made no physical sense. It was paper and ink, but it felt heavy, the way objects feel heavy when they contain the weight of consequence. She opened it to a random page. Numbers, dates, names she didn't know, but there, on the 3rd line, a name she did know, a name that made her stop. She turned to the beginning of the ledger and started reading properly. Roman was watching her face. She was aware of it. She kept reading. 2 minutes passed. She closed the ledger. She looked at Roman. Her voice, when it came, was completely level, which she would later understand. Was not composure but the specific absence of feeling that happens when a feeling is too large to be processed in real time. Victor Sloane didn't start this, she said. Roman's jaw tightened. Sloane has been feeding information to the Morettis for 7 years. That's in here. Your father found out. He told my father. My father documented it. She held Roman's gaze. But the person who ordered my father's death, the person who told the Morettis where he was, who told them to move before the case could be filed, that person is also in this ledger. Who, Roman said, 1 word. Barely a breath behind it. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about what it meant to say this name out loud. She thought about how every person in a story like this has someone they most cannot afford to have betrayed them, some figure around whom their understanding of their own history is organized. She thought about how Roman Belandi has been running his father's organization for 4 years, making decisions based on information provided to him by people he chose to trust. And she thought about what it means to tell a man that the architecture of his trust has been rotten at the foundation since before he built it. Your father's personal attorney, she said, a man named Gerald Cross. Roman didn't move. Cross has been managing both sides for 15 years, she said. Sloane reports to him. The Moretti connection runs through him. My father's death was authorized by him, and every major decision your father made in the last decade of his life, the properties, the transitions, the security arrangements, Cross shaped all of it. She held out the ledger. It's all documented. My father spent 2 years being certain before he gave this to Carla. Roman took the ledger. He opened it. He read for a minute, 2 minutes, 3. She watched his face. And the thing she saw happening, there was something she had no clean word for. It was the systematic collapse of a structure he'd been standing inside, and the particular horror of a man who realizes that the collapse didn't start today, that it started years ago, that he has been inside a falling building and thought it was standing. Closed the ledger. He was quiet for a long time. Cross is the one who advised me to accelerate the marriage contract, he said. His voice was controlled, but only just. He told me it was the fastest way to get Alara under protection before the Morettis moved on her. He knew everything about the arrangement, the timeline, location of the estate. Carla spoke quietly from behind them, which means he knows where you are right now, Mr. Belandi. And if Sloane reached to him when you left this morning, Nolan's phone went off. He looked at the screen and stood up fast, the chair scraping back against the concrete. One of the guys from the safe house. He said, "There are vehicles moving in this district. 3 of them, coming from the north." Elara looked at the door they'd come in through. She looked at Carla, at the ledger in Roman's hands, at the USB drive still in the case. "How did Cross know about this location?" she said to Carla. "He doesn't," Carla said. "But if Sloan tracked Roman's car this morning—" "We went on foot for the last block," Roman said. "He was already moving, already back at the door, checking through the gap without opening it fully. They're not here for the warehouse, specifically. They're running a grid." "How long?" Elara said. "Minutes." She picked up the USB drive and put it in her jacket pocket. She held out her hand to Roman. He understood without her explaining, gave her the ledger, and she put it back in the metal case and relocked it and handed the case to Carla. "There's a vehicle waiting 1 block north," she said. "Driver named Ket. He's Roman's." Carla took the case. "I know another way out of this building." "Then go," Elara said. "We'll draw them off." "Elara," Nolan started. "You go with her," she said. "You stay with the ledger. Don't contact me until Carla tells you it's safe." She looked at her brother, and the look was the one she'd been giving him since they were children, the one that said, "I have this. You don't need to carry it. Go. Trust me." He hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, which was progress for Nolan Voss. Then he nodded. Carla was already moving toward the back of the building, the metal case under her arm, Nolan at her shoulder. In 10 seconds, they were absorbed by the interior dark. Roman came back from the door. He looked at Elara. "You just sent the only evidence we have out the back door with 2 people, he said. "I sent it somewhere it won't be found," she said, "which is better than here. You gave Carla your trust very quickly. She knew my father. She picked up her jacket from where she'd set it on the shelving unit. And she's had that ledger this whole time and hasn't used it for personal gain. That's a kind of character reference." Roman looked at her. She couldn't fully read his expression in the gray light, but she thought it was something close to the look she'd seen in the breakfast room. That first morning, the look of a man recalibrating. "There's a staircase at the back of the loading area," he said. "It goes to the 2nd floor, and there's a window that overlooks the rear access lane. I know because my father brought me here once, when I was 17, and showed me the exits before he showed me anything else." "Was that normal parenting in your family?" "It was Belandi parenting." He moved toward the back of the space. "Come on." She followed him into the dark interior of the building. Away from the loading door, toward the staircase he described, and behind them she heard the first sound distant, vehicular, the low deliberate movement of heavy cars positioning, and she thought about Gerald Cross, sitting in whatever office he used, pulling strings through Sloan and through the Moretti network, and through 15 years of managed deception. And, she thought, he doesn't know that I have a copy of everything my father wrote, compressed onto a drive in my jacket pocket, and that Nolan Voss is currently walking out the back of this building with the original. The staircase was narrow and dark, and the second step from the top was loose, which she discovered with her full weight on it, and Roman's hand caught her arm before she went down. One fast grip, no hesitation. Steadied. He let go. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me in a burning building," he said. "Old rule. Is this a burning building?" "Not yet." They reached the 2nd floor. The window he'd described was their paint-sealed. Years of disuse, the latch corroded. Roman worked it with both hands while she stood at the interior side of the room, listening to the sounds from outside grow more specific, the particular sound of car doors, multiple, and voices carrying across open ground. The window gave with a grinding protest of old wood. Cold air hit her face, and she looked out at the rear access lane, empty, narrow, the kind of alley that exists in industrial areas as a functional afterthought. 1 story down. A dumpster positioned below the window that would serve as an intermediate drop if they were careful. Roman went first. He lowered himself to the exterior sill, dropped to the dumpster lid, absorbed it with bent knees, and stepped to the ground in one connected movement, quiet for the weight of it. He looked up at her. She swung her legs out. The ledge was narrower than she wanted. She didn't think about it. Thinking was exactly the wrong response to this kind of moment, and she dropped, caught the dumpster with her feet, felt the impact travel up through her knees and hips, grabbed Roman's arm, as she stepped down, and he took her weight without staggering. They were in the lane, 20 feet to the street. She could hear voices on the other side of the building, now organized, moving in a sweep pattern. They walked fast, not running. Running draws attention in a way that purposeful walking doesn't. And they reached the street and turned north, and 2.5 blocks later, Ket's car was where they'd left it. Engine idling, Ket reading something on his phone with the particular calm of a man who has waited in worse situations than this. They got in. The door closed. The car moved. She sat in the back seat beside Roman, and the USB drive was hard against her ribs inside her jacket pocket, and somewhere in the South Side warehouse district, 3 vehicles full of men sent by a lawyer named Gerald Cross were sweeping a building that contained nothing except cold air and oil stains and 2 sets of footprints in the dust leading to a window that was still open. Roman's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face went rigid. "What?" she said. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a photograph sent from Sloane's number. The image was of the Belandi estate, the front entry, the fountain, the circular drive taken from inside the gates. Time-stamped 4 minutes ago. Beneath the photograph, a text message. "Come home, both of you, or the staff stays here with us." She looked at the photograph. She looked at Roman. She thought about Mrs. Harlan, gray-streaked hair, the woman who brought her coffee at 7 in the morning and never asked if she'd slept. The woman who had been running this house for years and had never done anything except treat Alara with a distant, practical decency she hadn't asked for and had come to depend on without noticing. "How many staff in the house right now?" she said. 7, Roman said. His voice was something she hadn't heard from him before, not anger, below anger, the cold floor beneath the room where anger lives, plus the security rotation. Does Sloane have enough people to hold the estate? If Cross sent Moretti soldiers to back him up, yes. She thought about the USB drive in her pocket. She thought about Nolan and Carla with the ledger, somewhere south of here, moving towards safety. She thought about everything her father had written in that ledger over 2 years of patient, meticulous, terrified documentation, every date, every name, every transaction, the full architecture of a criminal conspiracy that had cost him his life before he could use it. She thought about Gerald Cross, pulling Sloane's strings, and Victor Sloane, standing in an estate he'd helped guard for 11 years, holding 7 people as leverage against them he'd served for all that time. Thought about how this was supposed to have been a contract, 1 year. Her name on a piece of paper in exchange for her brother's life. Transaction. A business arrangement between a woman with no other options and a man with an inherited empire and a complicated conscience. She thought about how completely, utterly, irrevocably far she was from that warehouse at 2 in the morning, that gun against Nolan's head, that pen in her hand. "We go back," she said. "Alara, we go back," she said again. "Because I am not the person I was when I signed that contract. And Sloane doesn't know that yet. And Gerald Cross definitely doesn't know that yet." And held the pressure until the light changed. And that gap between what they think they're dealing with and what they're actually dealing with is the only advantage we have. Roman looked at her for a long moment. In the back of the moving car, the city going past outside the windows, gray and cold and indifferent. "If we walk back through that gate," he said, "we're walking into a controlled space on their terms. I know. They'll separate us, probably. And you're still saying go." She met his eyes. "My father spent 2 years being afraid and being careful and building a perfect case, and they killed him anyway. I am done being careful." She held his gaze. "Drive to the estate," she told Ket. Ket drove. She sat back against the seat and looked out the window and felt with absolute clarity the specific moment when a person stops waiting for circumstances to change and decides to become the circumstance that changes everything. The moment that is not courage, exactly, but is what courage is built on top of, which is simply the refusal to be the version of yourself that loses. The estate gates appeared at the end of the road. They were open, waiting. The gates were open, the way a mouth is open before it closes. Ket slowed the car without being told, the professional instinct of a man who has driven into bad situations before and knows that the last 50 feet before a trap are the 50 feet that matter most. Roman put his hand on the back of the front seat. "Stop here," he said. Ket stopped. The gates were 30 feet ahead. Through them, the circular drive, the fountain, the stone face of the estate in the gray morning light. Everything looked exactly as it always looked, which was its own kind of wrong, the wrongness of a stage set, of a space that has been arranged to appear normal by people who know it well enough to arrange it. Laura counted. 2 visible figures near the front entrance. Neither of them was regular security, wrong posture, wrong positioning, standing where you'd stand if you were watching an approach rather than guarding a door. How many ways in besides the front gate? She said. 3, Roman said. Service lane east, the north wall gate, and a basement access from the property line on the south side that nobody knows about except me and Ket. Sloane, Roman was quiet for one beat. He's been here 11 years. He knows every entrance I know. Then they're all covered. Yes. She looked at the open gates, at the 2 figures near the entrance, at the fountain that was still turned off for the season, its basin empty, the stone dry. She thought about the inside of the house, the layout she'd memorized over 2 weeks of careful observation, the rooms and their adjacencies, the staircase and its sightlines, the library, where she'd sat at 10:30 on a Thursday night and understood for the first time that the man she'd married by contract was more complicated than the story she'd been handed. Sloane knows this house better than I do, she said. Yes, but he doesn't know what I know about the house. Roman looked at her. What do you know about the house? The sitting room wall, the east service entrance rotation, the section of north wall where the ivy is thick enough to climb. She held his gaze. I've been cataloging exits since my first night here. Sloane cataloged entrances. Those are different exercises. Something moved in Roman's face, not admiration. Something quieter than that. The particular look of a man who is realizing that someone he underestimated has been more prepared than he was this entire time. Basement access, she said. Where does it come up inside? Utility room. Ground floor rear. Between the kitchen and the back corridor. Is there a phone in the kitchen? Landline. Old system. Sloane might have cut it, might not have bothered. If it's working, can you reach anyone who can move fast? There are people I can call who don't go through Sloane. She nodded once. Then here's what we do. She went in through the front gate alone. This was the part Roman had argued against for 90 seconds, which was the most animated she'd seen him. His voice still controlled, but the control costing him. His hands doing the thing they did when he was containing something very still. 2. Still, fingers flat on his thighs. She told him the argument in 2 sentences. Sloane wants leverage, and the leverage he has is the staff. If she walks in alone, visibly unarmed, visibly cooperative, she becomes the most interesting thing in the room. And while she is the most interesting thing in the room, Roman goes in through the basement with Ket and reaches the kitchen phone. Roman told her that walking into a house controlled by Victor Sloane and a contingent of Moretti's soldiers was not a plan. It was a sacrifice. She told him it was both, and that was what made it work. He let her go. She could feel him watching as she walked through the gates, and she did not look back, because looking back would cost her the composure she needed, and she couldn't afford to spend it. 2 figures near the entrance moved when they saw her coming. One spoke into a radio. The other stepped forward to meet her, at the top of the drive, young dark jacket, the specific blankness of a man operating under instruction. He patted her down efficiently, found nothing, because she'd left the USB drive with Ket. Inside, he said. She went inside. The entry hall was wrong. In the same way the exterior was wrong, too still, the normal ambient sound of the house absent, no misses. Harlan moving through the back corridor, no staff sounds from the kitchen. She could feel the occupied weight of the building, the presence of people who weren't supposed to be there, distributed through the rooms around her. Sloane was in the formal sitting room off the main hall. He was standing near the window with a cup of coffee. Her first thought, absurdly, was that he'd used her coffee. The good stuff, Mrs. Harlan kept in the cabinet above the machine, and he turned when she came in with the expression of a man who's been expecting this and has decided to be pleasant about it. Mrs. Belandi, he said. Same weight on the name as always. Thank you for coming back. Where are the staff? She said. Comfortable. In the dining room, nobody's been harmed. He set his cup down. Where's Roman? He dropped me at the gate. She kept her voice flat, her body language tired rather than defiant, because defiance right now was the wrong tool. Defiance was what you used when you wanted the other person to react. She didn't want Sloane reacting. She wanted him talking. He said he needed time. Sloane's eyes moved over her face with the careful attention of a man who has run background on her and knows she's sharp and is therefore skeptical of everything she presents at surface value. Time for what? To think. She sat down in the nearest chair without being invited, which was deliberate, the gesture of someone too tired for performance. He's been on the phone. There are people he needs to reach before he does anything he can't undo. People like who? I don't know all of them. Someone named Cross came up. She watched his face. The mention of Cross was a needle she wanted to see where it landed. Whether Sloane's expression shifted in the way of a man hearing his handler's name come out of an unexpected mouth. It did shift, fractionally, a microscopic tightening around the eyes that he controlled almost immediately. Almost. Cross is Roman's attorney, Sloane said. Smooth. Of course he'd reach out. Sure, she said. She held the silence that followed without filling it, which was the hardest kind of silence to hold in a room with an armed man who is deciding how much he believes you, and she sat with her hands loose in her lap, and her face doing nothing, and she counted seconds. At 11 seconds, Sloane's radio crackled. He lifted it, listened, his eyes staying on her. Whatever the voice on the other end said, she couldn't make out. He responded with 2 words she couldn't hear clearly, and lowered the radio. Roman's not coming in through a gate, he said. No, she agreed. Sloane looked at her with a new configuration, not angry, recalibrating. Where is he? I genuinely don't know, she said, which was true as of 4 minutes ago. Stand up. She stood. We're going to the library, he said. You're going to sit where I can see you, and Roman is going to come to where you are, because that's what Roman does. He picked up his coffee. He's not capable of leaving someone behind. It's the thing that makes him good at what he does and terrible at what I'm doing right now. She walked ahead of him toward the library. Her heart was going at a pace she was managing, by sheer concentrated will, the kind of internal discipline that doesn't look like anything from the outside, that just looks like a woman walking down a hall. The library, the thin wall, the sitting room on the other side. She sat in the chair he indicated, the one facing the door, the one she'd sat in the first night. She found the gaps in the bookshelves. She put her hands on the armrests. She looked at Victor Sloane, who positioned himself across the room, near the window, with the particular stance of a man who is comfortable in this space, who has stood in this room at night many times, who belongs here in a way he is only now allowing himself to show. You've wanted this for a long time, she said. He looked at her. The organization, she said. Not just a piece of it, all of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. And the smile was different from the ones she'd seen before, not the managed. Professional warmth, but something more honest, which was somehow worse. The Belandi family built something significant, he said. Roman's father built it. Roman inherited it and spent 4 years making it smaller, more cautious, more legitimate. A pause. Things that are built to be significant shouldn't be made smaller by people who inherited them without understandings of what was required to build them. And Cross? Cross manages the complexity. Flat. He's been doing it for 15 years. Before I was involved. Before any of this. He had my father killed, she said. The room went very quiet. Sloane looked at her with the specific quality of a man, reassessing the scope of what she knows, the reassessment happening fast, the implications of it moving across his face too quickly to fully suppress. Martin Voss, he said finally. My father. That wasn't, he stopped. Started again. That was Cross's decision. Not mine. But you knew. A pause that was its own answer. I knew afterward. And you stayed. The work doesn't stop because of one decision you didn't make. He said it with the tone of a man who has rehearsed this particular justification enough times that it no longer sounds like a justification to him. Cross made a call. It was wrong. I didn't have the position then to. To what? Object? Her voice stayed level. You're telling me you stayed for 11 years in an organization run by a man who murdered my father because you didn't have the position to object. I'm telling you, he said, and now the smoothness was going, the thing underneath it showing that the world you walked into 2 weeks ago is not the world you think it is. Your father was not an innocent man who got caught in something. He was documenting people, building a case. He knew the risk. He was protecting his children. He was building a weapon, Sloane said. And weapons have consequences. Something happened in her chest, at that a compression, sharp and brief, that was grief and fury combined into a single physical event, kept her face still. She pressed her hands flat on the armrests and breathed through it and kept her face absolutely still. The window behind Sloane was gray with morning light. Outside, she could see the edge of the back grounds, the long shadows of the trees. She was calculating Roman would have reached the basement access by now. Ket had the drive, which meant the drive was safe. Carla and Nolan had the ledger. What remained here, in this room, in this house, was a man with 11 years of grievance and a radio, and however many Moretti soldiers Cross had sent to back him up, and one woman in an armchair with nothing in her hands, and something in the wall to her left that Sloane had never thought to use. "I want to see the staff," she said. "No. You said they weren't harmed." "They're not." "Then let me see them." "That's not a negotiation you're in a position to make." She looked at him. "Victor, I walked in here voluntarily, through the front gate, past your people, into this room. I'm sitting in this chair. I'm not fighting you. I'm asking to see 7 people who work in this house and have nothing to do with ledgers or crime families or 15-year conspiracies." She held his gaze. "Let me see them. Then I'll sit here and wait for Roman, however long you need." He looked at her for a long moment. This looked at her for a long moment. Smoothness came back, the decision being made behind it, the calculation of what giving her this costs versus what refusing it costs, in terms of the cooperative posture she's presenting. 2 minutes, he said. "Dining room. Then back here." He walked her to the dining room. 7 people, Mrs. Harlan, 2 kitchen staff, 3 household staff, 1 of the regular security rotation, who'd been inside when Sloane's people took the house. All seated, all unharmed. Physically, Mrs. Harlan had the specific expression of a woman who is furious and has decided that fury is a resource to be conserved rather than spent. She met Alara's eyes. Something passed between them, not words, something below words, the particular frequency of 2 women in a bad situation, acknowledging each other's presence as a form of refusal to disappear. Alara counted the room, 1 of Sloane's men near the door. 1 more she could see through the dining room window, outside, east side of the grounds. She looked at Mrs. Harlan. She held the look for 3 seconds, then shifted her eyes deliberately to the window and back. Mrs. Harlan's expression didn't change, but something behind it did a tiny, careful adjustment. The look of a woman who has been managing complicated households for complicated people, for complicated brutal, a very long time, and knows how to receive information without showing that she's received. "Okay," Alara said to Sloane. "Thank you." He walked her back to the library. She sat back in the chair. He went to the window. 3 minutes passed. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, a complete, immediate cut, the whole house going dark at once. The gray morning light from the windows, suddenly the only light in the building. Sloane moved fast, away from the window, radio up, but she was already moving faster, out of the chair and to the interior wall of the library, pressing flat against it, because in the dark a person against a wall is harder to locate than a person in open space. She heard Sloane's voice, low and sharp, into the radio. "What happened?" "Report." Static. Then a voice. Broken. "Basement level. Someone cut the minutes." "Roman." She heard Sloane cross the room, fast toward the door, and she moved not away from him, but laterally, along the wall, toward the window side of the room. She could hear him, but not see him, and he could hear her, but not see her. And for 4 seconds, the library was 2 people in the dark trying to locate each other by sound and breath. She found the side table by touch. The decanter from the first night still there. Picked it up and threw it at the far corner of the room, away from herself, and the sound of it hitting the shelving unit was enough. Sloane moved toward it. 2 steps, and she went through the library door into the hall. The hall was dark, but she knew it. She'd walked it every day for 2 weeks. Sometimes in the early morning when the lights were low, and she counted doors by touch and turned right toward the back corridor and the kitchen. Found the kitchen doorway. Found the wall. Found the landline by feel-old phone, hard plastic, mounted beside the refrigerator. She lifted the receiver, dial tone. Sloane hadn't cut it. She dialed the number Carla had given her at the warehouse, not Nolan's number. Carla's, the one she'd memorized in the car on the way in, because memorizing important numbers was something her father had taught her when she was 9 years old, and which she'd never stopped doing. It rang twice. "It's Alara," she said, "the estate. Now, whatever you have." Carla's voice, immediate and precise. 20 minutes. "We might not have 20. 15. Hold the kitchen." She hung up. The kitchen was at the back of the ground floor. 2 exits, the service corridor to the east, and the door to the utility room where Roman would be coming up from the basement. She positioned herself beside the utility room door, back to the wall, and waited. The house was full of sounds, movement upstairs, Sloane's voice somewhere in the front rooms. A door, another door, someone running on the gravel outside. The Moretti soldiers running fighting the net, looking for Roman in a dark house that he knew better than they did. The utility room door opened. She grabbed the arm that came through it by pure reflex, and Roman's voice came out of the dark, low and immediate. "It's me." She let go. He stepped into the kitchen. Ket was a shape behind him. "Power's cut from the basement," Roman said. "I can restore it from the main panel, but the panel is in the front utility closet, and that's covered," she said. "I know. Sloane has 6 people inside and 4 on the perimeter. I saw 2 outside. Mrs. Harlan's in the dining room with the staff. 1 guard. Cross is on his way," Roman said. Ket intercepted a call. 15 minutes. Carla's 15 minutes out too. She looked at him in the gray light from the kitchen window. "We need to hold this house until she gets here. Whatever she's bringing." Carla Dent, Roman said. Former federal investigator. 22 years organized crime. He said it without inflection. "You called a federal contact." "I called the person who's been building this case for longer than either of us have known it exists." He was quiet for 2 seconds. "The staff in the dining room." 1 guard. "Yes. If we move the staff to the kitchen, we control this room and the utility room. Fensible. Sloane has to come to us. And when Cross arrives to find his operation inside a house with no power, 7 civilian witnesses, and a federal investigator with documented evidence pulling up at the front gate." He looked at her. "That's a different situation than he left home for this morning." She thought about Victor Sloane in the dark front rooms, running his radio, managing his people, believing he still controlled what was happening in this building. She thought about Gerald Cross in a car somewhere north of the city, believing he was arriving to collect a ledger and consolidate power that had been a decade and a half in the construction. She thought about her father, who spent 2 years being careful and was killed for it, and about the man standing in a dark kitchen beside her who had spent 4 years running an inherited empire, without knowing it was rotten underneath. And she thought about what it means to be the person who changes the outcome, not the hero of the story, not the one who was always going to win, just the one who was still standing and still moving when everyone else thought the situation was already decided. "The dining room," she said. "Go." Roman went first through the service corridor, silent and fast. Ket held the kitchen door. She followed Roman into the dark corridor, and they reached the dining room door in under a minute, and Roman put his shoulder against it and opened it in one controlled motion. The guard inside turned. Roman was faster, 1 precise movement. The guard's radio on the floor. The guard himself against the wall, with Roman's forearm across his chest. Controlled, no injury. Pacific economy of a man who knows how to stop someone without permanently damaging them. "Staff," Roman said. "Kitchen now move." Mrs. Harlan was already standing. She moved the others, no hesitation, no panic, just the iron competence of a woman who has been waiting for someone to open the door and give the instruction. People through the corridor in under 90 seconds. Quiet, fast, Mrs. Harlan at the rear counting, heads like she was moving them from a fire drill. Alara held the corridor door while they passed. 7 people. Then Roman. Then she followed and let the door close behind her. Kitchen was crowded and dark and smelled of coffee that was still warm in the machine from this morning, and she thought, 10 minutes. Hold 10 minutes. Sloane's voice came from somewhere in the front of the house, calling to his people, reorganizing. He'd realized the dining room was empty. The sweep was contracting now, moving toward the back of the house, toward the kitchen. "He's coming," Ket said. "I know," Roman said. 2 of Sloane's men appeared at the corridor entrance. She saw their silhouettes against the slightly lighter dark of the hall. One of them had a flashlight, the beam cutting across the kitchen doorway, and she pressed back against the far wall and felt Roman beside her do the same. The flashlight moved, stopped on Mrs. Harlan, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded, and her expression that of a woman who has decided that dignity is non-negotiable regardless of circumstances. "Nobody move," the man with the flashlight said. "I am not moving, Mrs." Harlan said, with a tone that suggested she found the instruction somewhat beneath her. Two men came into the kitchen. Roman moved. It was very fast and very efficient, and when it was over, one man was on the floor, with the breath knocked out of him, and the other was against the refrigerator with Roman's hand on his collar. The flashlight rolled across the floor. Ket picked it up. Noise from the front of the house. Sloane's voice, sharper now, a question in it. Then from outside cars. Multiple. The particular sound of vehicles arriving fast and stopping with professional control. Alara went to the kitchen window. Through the glass, she could see the front drive, 2 cars, black. Not Moretti vehicles, the kind of vehicles that belong to people who carry federal identification. And behind them, Carla Dent, stepping out of the passenger side of the first car with the metal case under her arm and the bearing of a woman who has been waiting a very long time for this particular morning. 12 minutes, not 15. "She's here," Alara said. Roman came to the window. He looked. He was quiet for a moment. Then from the front of the house, a sound she hadn't heard yet, the specific, unmistakable sound of Victor Sloane, understanding that the situation has changed so completely from what he planned that no amount of management or smoothness or 11 years of positioning is going to put it back together. His voice on the radio clipped. The first genuine fear she'd heard in it. And then, underneath that, another car arriving at the gate, slower than the federal vehicles. A single car, expensive, unhurried. The car of a man who doesn't think he needs to hurry because he believes he's arriving at his own victory. Gerald Cross. She watched the car pull through the gates, Sloane's people on the perimeter, letting it through, because of course they were. They worked for Cross through Sloane. They would always let him through, and she watched the car stop up in the circular drive, and the door open, and she watched a man in his late 60s step out in a good coat. Silver-haired, physical presence of a man who has spent 50 years being the most important person in every room he enters. She watched him see the federal vehicles. Watched the precise moment when Gerald Cross, who ordered her father's murder to protect a 15-year conspiracy, understood that the room he was walking into was not the room he planned. She watched him look at the front of the house. She watched him reach back into the car. "He's going to run," she said. "No," Roman said. Beside her, his voice quiet and certain. "He's not." She looked at Roman. At the expression on his face in the flashlight's reflected glow, not rage, not triumph, but something steady and irrevocable. The expression of a man who has finally reached the point where being careful is no longer the right response to anything. He turned from the window and walked to the kitchen door. And she followed him because there was nothing else to do, because this was the moment everything had been moving toward, and the only question left was whether they reached Cross. Before Cross reached whatever he'd been reaching for in that car, the front door of the estate opened. The front door of the estate opened. Alara Voss walked out of the house she'd arrived at under guard 2 weeks ago, into the cold morning air of a day that was going to change the shape of everything. And behind her came Roman Belandi with empty hands, and the look of a man who has chosen what he's willing to lose. And ahead of them on the circular drive, Carla Dent was walking toward Gerald Cross, with the metal case and 22 years of federal experience, and 2 years of her father's handwriting. And Cross looked up from the car door and saw all of it at once, and his face did something she would never quite be able to describe afterward, not fear, not defeat, but the specific expression of a man watching the architecture of his entire life collapse at the foundation, while he is still standing inside it. The morning was cold and gray and absolutely still, and Victor Sloane walked out of the front door behind her and stopped on the steps and looked at the drive and said nothing at all. This is a work of pure cinematic fiction, created solely for entertainment. All characters, organizations, locations, and events are entirely invented. Gerald Cross didn't run. That was the thing she would remember later. When she tried to reconstruct the morning in the specific way, she reconstructed everything methodically, detail by detail, the way her father had taught her without knowing he was teaching her. Cross stood beside his car on the circular drive, with one hand still on the open door, and looked at Carla Dent walking toward him with the metal case, and he looked at the federal vehicles, and he looked at Alara and Roman coming through the front door of the estate, and he made a calculation. She could see him making it, the rapid, practiced calculation of a man who has been managing dangerous situations for 50 years and has learned that the first 30 seconds after a plan collapses are the 30 seconds that determine everything that follows. Closed the car door. He straightened his coat. He looked at Carla and said, in a voice that carried clearly across the cold morning air, "Carla, it's been a long time." Carla stopped 6 feet from him. "Gerald, I assume that case contains something you believe is significant." "I know it does. So do you." He nodded slowly, like a man receiving information he'd already accounted for. Then he looked past Carla to Alara, and the look he gave her was the most unsettling thing about the entire morning, not threatening, not calculating, but something close to tired. The tiredness of a man who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time and has just been told he can put it down and is trying to decide if the relief is worth what putting it down costs him. "Martin Voss's daughter," he said. "Yes," she said.
"You look like him." A pause.
"He was a stubborn man. He was thorough," she said. "That's different." Cross looked at the metal case. He looked at Roman. He did not look at Victor Sloan, who was still standing on the steps of the estate behind them all. And that deliberate avoidance was its own kind of statement. The statement of a man who has already decided which pieces of this are salvageable and which are not. And Victor Sloan is not salvageable. "I want to speak to Roman," Cross said. "Alone," Alara said. Cross looked at her, not offended, assessing. "No," she said again, steadier. "Whatever you need to say to Roman, you say in front of everyone standing on this drive. Because the era of private conversations that nobody else gets to know about is over this morning. It ended when my father finished that ledger." A long silence. A bird moved through the trees at the edge of the property, quick and purposeful, gone before she could identify it. Cross looked at Roman. "How much does she know?" "Everything," Roman said. His voice was flat and complete. "She knows everything." Cross made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Somewhere between them, the sound of a man revising his understanding of a situation. "Your father would have liked her," he said to Roman. "Don't," Roman said. "I'm not being sentimental. I'm being accurate." Cross put his hands in his coat pockets. "Your father and I were partners for 30 years. Not just attorney and client. Partners. I want you to understand that before whatever comes next." "I understand you had Martin Voss killed," Roman said. The drive was very quiet. One of the federal agents near Carla's car shifted his weight. That was the only movement. "Martin Voss was going to bring down the entire organization," Cross said. "Not just the criminal elements. Everything. Legitimate holdings, properties, the transition work your father and I had spent 10 years building toward. He didn't distinguish between the parts worth keeping and the parts worth discarding. He just documented, indiscriminately. He was protecting his children," Alara said. "He was destroying mine." Cross said, and for the first time, something underneath the managed exterior showed itself, not guilt, not remorse, but grief, real and old and badly managed. The grief of a man who made a terrible decision a long time ago and has been living in the consequences. So long they've become the walls of the room he exists in. "I have a son. He was 17 in 2013. The legitimate business your father's documentation would have destroyed the properties, the financial structures, the management company. My son was the one set to inherit it. Clean half. The half that was supposed to be the way out for the next generation." Stared at him. "So you had my father killed to protect an inheritance. Protect a future." "Yes." He held her gaze. "I know what that sounds like. It sounds like what it is." "Yes." He said it without flinching. "Does." Roman stepped forward. One step, not aggressive, just closing distance. "Victor, how long did you know about Cross?" Specifically. Sloan, still on the steps, was quiet for a moment. Then, 7 years. "You've known for 7 years that the man Managing this organization's legal structure ordered the murder of a civilian, and you said nothing. I was managing the relationship. Sloan said it the same way. He said everything smooth, professional, the language of a man who categorizes moral decisions as operational variables. Cross kept the organization functional. The information he fed to the Morettas was controlled. He was managing them as much as he was serving them. He kept them from moving against us directly for years. He was playing both sides, Roman said. He was keeping the peace. He was keeping his position. Roman's voice didn't rise. It went in the opposite direction, quieter, more precise. The way a blade gets more dangerous, the thinner it is. And you let him. For 7 years. While I made decisions based on information that ran through him. While I trusted your assessment of situations you were both shaping. Sloan said nothing. The Moretti repositioning, Roman said. 3 weeks ago. You told me it was probably nothing. Sloan was quiet for 4 seconds. I wasn't certain at that point what Cross intended, but you suspected another silence. Smaller. Yes. Roman looked at him for a long moment. In that look was 11 years. 11 years of professional proximity, of trust extended and apparently received, of a structure built on a foundation that one man had known was compromised and chosen to stand on anyway. She watched Roman look at Victor Sloan, and she watched him arrive at the understanding that some betrayals don't have a clean emotional category. Some of them are just heavy and permanent and have to be carried forward because there's no option to put them down. Carla, Roman said, without looking away from Sloan. Yes, Carla said. The documentation in that ledger. The federal case your people have been building since Martin Voss died. What do you need from me to complete it? Carla looked at him steadily. Full cooperation. Your testimony regarding the organizational structure, the financial flows, and every decision you're aware of that Cross influenced. Immunity is on the table for cooperation. At this level, my people confirmed it this morning. Sloan? Same offer. Same terms. Whoever cooperates fully and first gets the better end of it. She looked at Sloan on the steps. That's not sentiment. That's procedure. Victor Sloan looked at Gerald Cross. Cross looked back at him with the expression of a man who has already made his own calculation and is not going to be moved by whatever Sloan is looking for in his face. Whatever 11 years of professional loyalty had built between them, Cross had already quietly dismantled it, sometime in the last 60 seconds, and they both knew it. Sloan looked at Carla. I want the agreement in writing before I say anything. It'll be in your hands within the hour, Carla said. Sloan nodded once. He came down the steps. He walked past Alara without looking at her, and she let him pass and didn't because there was nothing say anything. Because there was nothing worth saying. Victor Sloan was going to spend the next phase of his life dealing with consequences she didn't have to administer. That was enough. Cross was still standing by his car. He looked at Alara one more time. For what it's worth, he said. It isn't, she said. But say it anyway. He was quiet for a moment. Your father was the best man I knew. And I destroyed him to protect something that didn't deserve protecting as much as he did. He looked at the metal case in Carla's hands. I've known that since 2013. I've been knowing it every day since then. She looked at him. She thought about her father at his kitchen table, with small handwriting and enormous patience, building a case over 2 years, terrified and methodical, and ultimately unable to outrun what was coming for him. She thought about what it costs a person to know the right thing and spend a decade and a half not doing it. Then you know exactly what this morning is, she said. Yes, Cross said. I do. He put his hands back in his coat pockets and turned toward Carla's people and walked toward them without being guided. The walk of a man who has decided that the last thing he can do with any integrity is make this easy. The next 4 hours were procedural and exhausting in the specific way that the aftermath of crisis is always exhausting, not dramatic, not cathartic, just the relentless administrative weight of statements and documentation, and people asking the same questions in slightly different configurations. Federal agents moved through the estate. Mrs. Harlan made coffee for everyone with the grim efficiency of a woman who has decided that practical contribution is the only reasonable response to chaos, and nobody said no to the coffee. Alara gave her statement in the formal sitting room where the wedding had happened, sitting in a chair across from an agent who took notes on a tablet and asked careful questions and did not seem surprised by any of her answers which suggested Carla had briefed her people more thoroughly than Alara had realized. She told them everything. The warehouse at 2 in the morning, contract, the photograph, the coordinates, the book on her shelf with the penciled numbers which turned out, when the agent explained it, to have been placed there by one of the household staff who had been quietly working with Carla's investigation for 8 months, a detail that made her think about Mrs. Harlan's folded hands in the dining room in a new way. When the statement was finished, she sat in the chair for a moment after the agent left. Just sat, the way you sit when your body finally receives permission to stop performing function and simply exists in a space. Her hands were in her lap. The ring was still on her finger. She'd stopped noticing it sometime in the past 3 hours. Nolan arrived at the estate at midday. He came through the front gate in Carla's second car, still in the too large flannel shirt, with the cut on his forehead cleaned properly now, and a look on his face that she recognized the look of someone emerging from an enclosed space into air and light. The involuntary physical adjustment to the fact that the immediate danger is over, which is its own kind of shock because the body doesn't know how to stop bracing. She met him in the drive. He grabbed her and held on, and she held back, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was long enough to matter. When they separated, he looked at her face and said, "You okay?" "Getting there," she said. "You?" "Getting there." He looked at the estate, the federal vehicles, the agents moving through the grounds. "It's really over. The immediate part is." He understood what she meant. The rest of it takes longer. He nodded. He looked at the ring on her hand and then looked at her face, and she could see him wanting to ask something and deciding this wasn't the moment. And she was grateful for that because she didn't have the answer yet, and she knew it. Dad knew what he was doing, Nolan said. With the ledger. Carla. With all of it. He always knew what he was doing, she said. That was never the problem. Nolan looked at her. Problem was he couldn't finish it. We finished it, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and something that was not a laugh at all, the specific sound of a person processing grief and relief simultaneously, which the human voice has never quite developed a clean mode for. He put his arm around her shoulders briefly and then dropped it, and they stood together in the cold midday air of the estate drive and watched the methodical, unglamorous work of consequence proceeding around them. Roman found her in the library at 4 in the afternoon. She was sitting in the chair she'd sat in the first night, the lamp on, the bookshelves in front of her. She'd been looking at the gaps, the 2 books he'd removed from the lower shelves, the one from the upper back shelf. She'd been thinking about secrets and the shapes they leave behind when they're gone, the negative space of things that used to be hidden and aren't anymore. Came in and sat across from her the way he had that first night. He didn't have anything in his hands. He unhardened. He looked tired in the deep, genuine way of someone who has been running on will and adrenaline since before dawn and has now hit the point where the body presents its bill. They sat in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable silence. The silence of 2 people who have been through enough together in a short enough time that silence between them has stopped being a space that needs filling. Carla's people will be here another 2 days, he said. Maybe 3. Okay. They'll need more from you. Probably tomorrow. I know. He looked at the bookshelves. The books I removed. I took them to Cross to review contract language that was in one of them. A reference text. He looked back at her. 11 years. I took documents to the man who killed your father to review contract language. I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know. I know you didn't, she said. That doesn't make it Roman. She held his gaze. I know you didn't know. That's separate from what comes next. You don't need to confess it to me. He was quiet. What does come next? She looked at her hands in her lap. The ring. The plain, silver band she'd put on herself in an afternoon-lit parlor with a flat, clear voice. And no ceremony and no expectation that it would mean anything beyond the year written into the contract. The organization, she said. What are you going to do with it? He exhaled slowly. What I've been trying to do for 4 years. Dismantle the parts that should be dismantled. Make the rest legitimate in a way that actually holds. He paused. It's slower work than it sounds. I know. And the properties. The legitimate holdings there are people who work for those businesses who have nothing to do with any of this. 300 and something employees. They need the transition to be careful. Then be careful. She looked at him. You're good at careful. You just needed to know what you were being careful for. He looked at her for a long moment. In the lamplight, his face was the most readable it had ever been. Not because he was performing openness, but because the managed stillness was simply gone, exhausted out of him. And what was underneath it was a person, complicated and flawed, and carrying a lot of things, like most people, trying to figure out how to put down the right ones. Contract, he said. The year. 6 months remain. I'm aware, she said. You could leave, he said. Prenuptial agreement stands. Nolan's debt is already gone. You've done more than the contract required. You could leave tonight. She looked at him steadily. Is that what you want? It's what the contract gives you the right to do. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the lamp, at the bookshelves, at the gaps where the books had been. He looked back at her, and when he spoke, his voice had the quality it had at the breakfast table on the first morning over lukewarm coffee, the quality of a man who has decided that being careful with language is a form of respect, not evasion. No, he said. It's not what I want. But what I want isn't. That's not the right frame for this situation. You came here because of a gun against your brother's head. Every day after that was shaped by that beginning. I don't know how to ask for something when the beginning of everything between us was that. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it means to trace a decision back to its origin, whether the origin determines the meaning of everything that follows, or whether meaning is built in the accumulation of subsequent choices, the daily incremental choosing of what to do next with what you've been handed. She thought about her father, who made a choice in 1997 to warn a man he didn't know against an attempt on his life, and who spent 15 years living with the shape of that choice, not knowing until the end whether it had been the right one, building his documentation in the quiet of his small, careful life, doing the thorough work of a man who understands that some things don't resolve quickly, and the only response is to keep going. She thought about Nolan, who made one terrible panic decision and surrounded it with other terrible decisions, and finally, at the end of it, made one correct one, putting his sister under the protection of the only person he could think of who was powerful enough to keep her alive, in the only way available to him, which was a mess and cost everyone dearly, and was also in its way an act of love. She thought about Roman Belandi, who inherited an empire he didn't fully understand, who made decisions based on information that was compromised before he ever touched it, who had spent 4 years trying to build something worth keeping out of something that was partly rotten, and who had sat across from her in this library on a Thursday night and told her about a photograph and said, I never knew what the key went to in a voice. That was the most honest thing she'd heard from anyone in a very long time. Contract gives me the right to leave, she said. It doesn't give me a reason to. Roman looked at her. I have a job, she said. My archive research position. I'd need to go back to it, of course. And my apartment. I should go back to it at least to sort through things. See what needs to be kept. That's reasonable. And Nolan needs somewhere to land while he figures out what he's doing with the rest of his life. Can't stay in a hotel indefinitely. There's a guest house on the north side of the property, Romanson said. It hasn't been used in 2 years. He's welcome to it. She looked at him. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, still not quite a smile, still the memory of one, but closer than any version she'd seen before. You planned that answer, she said. I had 2 seconds, he said. Approximately, she looked at the lamp, at the bookshelves, at the 3 gaps where things had been taken away and not replaced. She thought that she might find 3 books in the coming months that deserved to go there, not necessarily the same books, but books that fit the space, that made the shelf make sense again. Because empty spaces in a library are honest, but they're not comfortable, and there's a point at which honest and livable have to find a way to coexist. I'm going to continue finding things out, she said. That doesn't stop. I'll want access to everything related to my father. Full documentation. Whatever Cross and Sloane's cooperation produces, you'll have it. And if I find something that changes what I think about how this organization should be dismantled, tell me, he said, directly, not through channels. She nodded once. Alara. He said her name for the first time without a title attached to it. Not Miss Voss, not Mrs. Belandi, just her name. The way you say someone's name when you're done with the formal infrastructure of how you've been addressing each other. I can't undo what the beginning of this was. Nobody can undo anything, she said. That's not the work. What's the work? She considered this honestly, the way she considered everything the way her father had, with the patience of a person who understands that rushing and answers it is how you get a wrong one. Building something that's worth what it cost, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once, the same way she had the nod of two people who have arrived at an understanding that doesn't require elaboration, that exists in the space between words rather than inside them. 3 days later, Carla Dent sat across from Alara in the estate's small breakfast room and put the sealed envelope from inside the metal case on the table between them. Your father addressed this to you, Carla said. He gave it to me in 2013 and told me to hold it until the case was resolved. He said you'd know when to open it. Alara looked at the envelope. Her name on the front, in her father's small, careful handwriting, the same hand that had filled the ledger with 2 years of patient documentation. The same hand that had written her birthday cards, with small coded numbers she'd been carrying in her memory for 11 years old, without knowing what they unlocked. Picked it up, turned it over, held it. You can open it now or later, Carla said. It's yours now, she said. She opened it. Inside, a single page, both sides covered in her father's writing. Not documentation, no dates, no names, no evidence. Just a letter. She read it at the small table while Carla sat across from her with the quiet respect of a woman who understands that some things require a witness and some require privacy, and this is the latter. She read it twice. When she finished, she folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in the inside pocket of her jacket. Close. Carla waited. He says he's sorry he couldn't finish it himself, Alara said. Her voice was steady, not controlled steady, the way water is steady when it's deep enough. And he says he knew I would. Carla nodded. He also says, she stopped, took a breath that was not quite even. He says the most important thing he ever taught either of us was the combination to that lock. Not because of what was inside, because of what finding it means, about the person doing the finding. She put her hand flat on the table. He says people who finish things are rarer than people who start them, and that I always finished things. The breakfast room was quiet. Morning light came through the window at its usual angle. The same light that had been coming through this window every morning for 2 weeks. The same light she'd been watching over cold coffee while she figured out what she'd signed and who she was in relation to it. Carla reached across the table and put her hand briefly over Alara's. Not a gesture of pity, just contact, the acknowledgement of one person to another that the thing they have just carried is heavy and they are glad it is down. He was right, Carla said. For what it's worth, from someone who watched you finish it. Alara looked at the window, at the morning, at the grounds beyond the glass, where the fountain was still off for the seasons, its basin still empty, the stone dry and patient in the cold. She thought she might ask Roman about turning the fountain back on. It seemed like the kind of thing that shouldn't wait until spring. Nolan moved into the guest house on a Tuesday. He showed up with 2 bags and a face that looked like a man who had made the decision to begin rebuilding something, and was not quite sure where the foundation goes, but is committed to finding out. He and Alara spent 3 hours moving furniture around in the small space, disagreeing about where the couch belonged. In the way they had always disagreed about furniture, loudly and without resolution, eventually leaving it where it was to begin with, because that was always where it ended up. She drove back to her apartment that week and spent 2 days going through it. She kept most of her books, her father's old watch that she'd been storing in a box at the back of the closet for 11 years, a box of photographs she'd been meaning to sort since before any of this happened, packed what she needed, and arranged for the rest to be held. She called her supervisor at the archive and explained that she'd had a family situation and was ready to return. Her supervisor, who had known her for 4 years and understood that Alara Voss did not offer explanations unless she intended them to be sufficient, accepted this and told her the Hartfield collection had been waiting and was getting impatient, which was how her supervisor joked, and which made her laugh for the first time in 3 weeks with the specific surprise quality of a laugh that happens before you've decided to laugh. She went back to work. She drove from the estate into the city 3 mornings a week and worked in the archive and drove back in the evenings. She developed a rhythm. Rhythms, she had always found, were the best structural response to the aftermath of chaos, not because they solved anything, but because they gave the days a shape, and shapes make the work of living more possible. Roman was there in the evenings when she came back. Not waiting for her, he had his own work, the long and complicated work of dismantling a criminal organization, carefully enough that the legitimate parts survived the process. He had meetings, he had calls, he had federal liaisons and attorneys, new attorneys, vetted carefully, not managed by anyone connected to anything they were trying to leave behind. He was busy in a way that looked like a man who has finally found the version of the work he can do without compromising the version of himself he's trying to become. Some evenings they ate together. Some evenings they didn't. Sometimes she found him in the library after 11, and sometimes she found the library empty and took it for herself. Space between them was not the space of the contract anymore. It was something they were building in real time, without a template, the way most things worth building get built. One evening in late spring, she came home to find the fountain running. She stood on the drive and looked at it. For a moment, the water moving in the gray evening light, the sound of it reaching her from 20 feet away. The first water sound the estate had made in whatever months it had been off for the season. It was not a dramatic thing. It was just a fountain, running, doing what it was built to do. Roman was standing near the front entrance, watching her look at it. I asked about it, she said. I remembered, he said. She stood there a moment longer, just looking, and then she walked toward the house, and he held the door, and they went inside. The evening settled around the estate, the way evenings do when the thing that was broken has been set. Not perfectly, but set when the work is not finished, but is underway. When the people doing the work have stopped asking whether it's possible and started asking only what comes next. In the library, her father's letter was in the inside pocket of her jacket, which was on the hook by the door. The metal case was with Carla's people, logged and cataloged, part of the federal record. The ledger was evidence now official, documented, doing the work it was built to do. The combination she'd entered to unlock the case had already begun to blur at the edges of her memory. The way combinations do, when you no longer need them, the numbers still there, the urgency of them gone, space they'd occupied, becoming available for other things. She sat in the chair in the library. The lamp was on. The bookshelves were in front of her, the 3 gaps still empty, and she thought soon, not tonight, but soon. She picked up a book from the stack on the side table, something she'd brought from her apartment, one of her father's, a spine cracked from use, and she opened it and she read, and the house was quiet around her, and outside the fountain, Jonathan was running, and somewhere in the North Guest House her brother was figuring out where his couch belonged. And at the desk in the study down the hall, a man who had been given an empire and was in the process of choosing what to keep of it, was writing something with the careful attention of a person who understands that what you write down is what survives. No debts remained. No enemies remained that the morning hadn't already named and handed to the people whose job it was to manage them. No secrets remained between the people in this house, not the useful kind. The kind that builds over time into the infrastructure of betrayal. What remained were only the ordinary privacies of people learning each other, which is different, which is the work that has no endpoint and no document, which is simply the choosing, every day, of what to do with the life that is left. Alara read until the lamp was the only light, and the fountain ran in the dark outside, and the night came in full and quiet over Chicago, and neither of them was running from anything.